Hello and welcome to the Wait I Know You podcast, season 1, episode 7. My name is Nick Rounds and I will be your host. My next guest is the executive director of the Interactive Art Collection, which runs the nonprofit pop-up exhibit, The Art of Nintendo Power. The collection features art, sketches, and physical pieces used in the creation of issues of Nintendo Power magazine. In addition to being a video game grail collector, he also works in the video games industry. Stephan Reese. Wait, I know you. How are you today?
I'm great, man. How are you?
Good. It's been a while.
I was going to say long time no see, but it hasn't really been that long.
Yeah,
grand scheme of things.
Yeah, you and I used to work together at Mobility Wear.
Yep.
We're both video game veterans and video game nerds inside and out. So we're here to talk about your collection of all the amazing things that you've done and collected with Nintendo Power, but I actually want to go back to your roots first about what made you a video game nerd. So what made you a video game nerd? And I say that lovingly, of course, knowing that I'm one too.
This next Sunday I'll be turning 40, so just to frame that a little bit, I grew up as a sort of Nintendo generation kid. Although I attribute my first game, I'm pretty sure my first game that I ever played was Matterhorn Screamer for the Radio Shack Tandy computers. I don't know if you remember the Tandys at all. They're basically they were TRS-80 clones. I'm pretty sure that was the first game I ever played. But generally grew up with the NES. And honestly, like, as far as roots and getting me into the industry and stuff like that, it was Nintendo Power magazine. There was Nintendo Power would do these sections where they would go to developers and show how games were made. And I was like, I don't, this is all magic to me. I have no idea how this works, but like, this is what I want to do with my life. So from about 4th grade, I knew that I wanted to be in the games industry, thanks to the magazine. And that's not a small reason why I'm doing what I'm doing today. So, grew up as a Nintendo kid. For the most part, I was the kid on my block who the only one who had one, and so I was. My friends would greet me in the mornings. To my parents' chagrins, they would already have found their way into the house somehow. And be playing the NES when everyone else woke up. I was starting from an early age, I was just a really diehard Nintendo kid.
That's awesome. What were some of the most formative Nintendo games for you growing up? As far as like either the ones that your neighborhood kids really wanted to play or the ones that you absolutely loved?
They were mostly ones that I bonded with my sisters over. 3D World Runner, oddly, is like one of my really big like when I really think about formative games when I was a kid. 3D World Runner was a huge one. Mario 3, Chippendale Rescue Rangers I played for hours with my sister April. And what a Rad Racer. And as much as I love RPGs now, I really wasn't into them when I was a kid. I think I got exposed to them when I was a little bit too young. Like my grandfather bought me Final Fantasy for a birthday, and I was just like, I don't understand what this is. And so I put that down. And then the next time I tried an RPG was Draken for the Super Nintendo, which is not a very good entry to RPGs. It's like a ported European PC RPG, and that didn't go over very well. So eventually I found Earthbound. That was actually my big as far as games that I love today and genres that I love today. Earthbound was my entry point to really loving RPGs, and then I found Chrono Trigger and Secret of Mana and all these games, and so today my favorite genre, despite not having too much time to play them anymore, I'm sure you can relate, is RPGs. But yeah, those are some of my favorites.
That's
I don't
awesome.
think anyone ever says. I'm pretty sure I'm the only one ever who said 3D World Runner is their favorite game. So
Yeah, that's a deep cut for sure. Are your sisters still gamers today?
No, they both fallen out. In fact, most of their gaming collections are somewhere in this room. So
Winner is you. That's awesome. Yeah, I had a similar experience as well with RPGs. I didn't love them as a kid. I remember seeing the art for Final Fantasy and just loving the pixel art for all like the mage and everything else. But when I played, I was like, "The hell is this?"
yeah, this isn't what I thought it would be at all.
Yeah, it wasn't until Star Tropics, similar to you, it wasn't until Star Tropics and Mario RPG that I was really like, "Oh, I get it." So I think I just
Mario
needed
RPG
something
is
more
amazing.
accessible. So, and then going back to Nintendo Power magazine specifically, did you collect Nintendo Power from like the very, very start?
Yeah, I was a subscriber, and I had all of my issues up to a certain point where I think, as many of us collectors have these stories of suddenly being too cool for school. Like we're not into games for a hot minute, and then we sell all our stuff at a yard sale. I think I probably ditched most of my Nintendo Powers when I was probably 16, and then spent all my adult years getting all that back. So that was a good plan.
This is live. Sorry, my cats decided they want to have a cat fight while I'm recording.
That's okay.
Being jerks.
The magic of editing.
Exactly. All right. So let's talk about the collection. So your Art of Nintendo collection, and to set some context here, is that you've collected different pieces from things that have created and gone into the creation of Nintendo Power magazine. And considering it's mainly just you, your collection is absolutely massive. And I remember seeing like some of the pieces for the first time. Like I was gobsmacked is the only way I could describe it. Just it was a punch in the gut of nostalgia, and I was just actually absolutely blown away to see physical pieces from it. What are some of the early pieces that started your collection?
So I didn't start out collecting like incredibly rare things. Like I started out just trying to get to grow my shoebox collection, right? So I had my literal shoebox full of like SNES games, and that was up until about 10 years ago. And I started to collect sets. That was my thing. I decided like that would be a fun thing to do. Like, oh, what if I got every Nintendo game? What would that be like? Like that was always like that childhood fantasy of like, I wonder what it would be like to have every game. And so I started with Super Nintendo, and started to grow that collection, and got sort of finished with that, and moved on to the next. Just decided like this is what I want to do. I like to collect sets, and so I kept doing sets and sets and sets, and did 12 North American sets for various consoles. It was around 9,000 games. And at some point, I realized that I liked the hunt. Like that was what was really like what I was super into. That was like, I do love playing these games when I have time and that kind of thing, but like for the most part, most of them sit on the shelf and look pretty, and the completionist aspect of like, yes, I have done this. This is a thing I have done. But I came to realize that what I was doing was not hard. It was just expensive, right? For the most part, unless you're collecting like ultra rare sealed graded games, for the most part, if you want a game today, regardless of what it is, you can have it, right? You can go online, you can find someone that has it, and you can pull that trigger, right? So, it may be expensive, it may be more than you want to pay for it, but if you want to do it, you can do it, right? And so I started to think, okay, well, what is genuinely difficult? And so I started to collect point of sale displays, right? You see a lot of them behind me, the Mario statues and the Star Fox, and there's a bunch of fiber optic signs over here, and World of Nintendo cabinets and all that kind of stuff. And that was definitely harder, right? Because things that aren't for sale are harder to collect.
Yeah.
And but I had gotten to the point where I sort of was happy with where I was there too. I got all the signs I wanted. I got all the statues that I wanted. And I was kind of like, okay, well, what's next? And I was flipping through an issue of Nintendo Power magazine, and if you open the front cover of some of the earlier issues, they have an ad for the Power line, which was the gameplay counselor call-in line.
Mm-hmm.
And there were these three kids sitting on a chair, and they were wearing these jackets, and I was like, I wonder if those jackets exist. And so that suddenly became my new onus. I wanted a gameplay counselor jacket, and so I started reaching out to gameplay counselors in droves, and through that process, and you know, I did get all those jackets, and I did get all sorts of gameplay counselor memorabilia, phones from their desks and televisions, and one of the other exhibits that we do, Art of Nintendo Power, is definitely like our flagship exhibit. We also have an exhibit built around gameplay counselors, and so like at Portland 2019, I recreated the desk of a gameplay counselor in the 90s using, aside from the physical desk, everything else that I used was from a gameplay counselor's desk, because I was going to counselors, and you know how I know you can relate, like when you leave a job, as we have all left jobs in this very cyclical industry, you take everything that's on your desk and you put it in a box, and then you put that box in your garage. And I'm sure, Nick, how many of those boxes you got in your garage right now? At least one, right?
Well, I don't have a garage. I have I have storage space and closets.
Sure.
I definitely have.
But they're in there.
Yeah, because I'm working remote and my cats knock over everything. My usual desk that's unpacked, you've seen what my desk looks like with the amount of toys on it, as if I'm not surrounded by toys already. But yeah, my desk, my work desk, is actually packed in my closet right now in a box. So guilty as charged.
So that became a strategy. I went to these counselors who had a box sitting in the garage for the last 30 years, and I was just asking for that box. And surprisingly, a lot of them said, okay, we worked something out. And so like the displays that I was able to create for that exhibit, it's not just like the things that you would expect, like prototype games or like, you know, magazines or posters and that kind of thing. Like it's literally like half off coupons from local restaurants. And like I was really able to like sketches that they had drawn while they were sitting on the phones with kids, like just doodling right as they're explaining how to get through the 6th hour of Final Fantasy. And I was able to like have a really compelling display that way. So during that adventure, I ran into one gameplay counselor who had said, you know what, I don't have anything from my counselor days, but when I left gameplay counseling, I went and I drew for Nintendo Power magazine, and I still have some of that art. And like in a very classic like meme way, like the camera zoomed into my brain and then you see it just explode. It had never occurred to me that those kinds of things would be out there to collect, right? And it's very similar to like when we're kids watching cartoons, we never have that connection of like, oh, there's someone voicing Michelangelo, there's someone voicing Darkwing Duck, like those are people, like that, like there's production behind this. You never think about the production. And very similarly, I never thought like, oh, someone had to draw all this stuff and it's out there still. Like, right. And so yeah, my brain exploded and I said, yes, of course, I would love to buy your art from you. And then I kind of found my ultimate goal, right, of like chasing things that are harder and harder to do, because now I'm in a place where almost everything that I find, that's the only one. Right. So like it doesn't get any harder than that. Right. Like if I want to go find a thing, I have to find that thing. Right. It's not like, you know, even the shortest runs of NES games, you know, like stadium events, they made 10,000 of, like that's still 10,000. Right. Versus just finding a piece of art or, you know, or a sculpture or, you know, like it's just, it's so it's really, that really scratched my itch for for the hunt, right? People ask me what my grail piece is, right? And it's always I don't know. It's the thing that I find tomorrow, because like I just never know. I'll never know when I'm done, right? I have no idea what Nintendo has, and they are never going to be forthcoming. And I don't know what's been thrown away, right? I don't know what's been given to children. I don't know what's been sold at yard sales. I don't know whose attic has this thing. So, barring me literally finding every piece of art ever, which is not possible, I'll never know when I'm done. And so that's why like this has been like my end goal, right? And that's why, since I'll never know when I'm done, there'll never be a point of completion. I was like, okay, well then what is next for me? And that's how we got to the nonprofit. And I was like, okay, well, I'm not going to be a basement collector. Like, the stuff deserves to be seen. And so now I get out there to museums, or to retro shows, and I piggyback off them to do pop-up museums and bring the art to the people, and it's been really fulfilling. And like, I have my career, I love my career, but like, people talk about life's work, like this really is my life's work. Like, getting this art out to the people who want to see it is my life's work.
That's awesome. You mentioned Nintendo Power counselors previously. Did you ever call Nintendo Power counselors as a kid?
Once. It was very expensive. So,
same here.
Yeah. So, the counselor line was a local call, right? And for people who are not as elder statesmen as we are, it used to be that if you did not live near a person, you got charged an incredible amount of money the further away you were. So that's why, like, I talked to counselors, and they're like, the local kids would call constantly, not necessarily wanting to like talk about a specific problem, but just talk to someone who who spoke their language, an adult who knew what they were talking about. Because at that point, like, gaming was like, yes, there were outliers, but gaming was far and away pointed at children. And so a lot of these kids didn't know any adults, had never talked to an adult who knew what they were talking about. And so they would call these counselors, because the call was free for all of these like Redmond kids. They would just call and be like, I don't have any questions, I just want to talk about how awesome Mario is, right? And like, they would just talk, and it's awesome. But yeah, I did call once. It was for the dragon boss in, what is it, Mega Man 2, Mega Man 1, the there's one or two with the.
I think it's 2.
Is it 2? Yeah. It was the dragon boss, and like, there's no really secret to that except for get good at platforming. So it wasn't a very fulfilling call, but it was very expensive.
Yeah, I had a similar experience. I only called them once, and I think it was for Castlevania 2, of like figuring out the kneeling at the wall to get the whirlwind and everything else.
Sure.
And yeah, it was like a huge negotiation with my parents. Yeah, it's funny you say that, because like kids these days, I hate to say that, kids these days really take it for granted, like how mainstream video games are now. But growing up, like, I mean, you mentioned that your first, like me actually, like my first game was not on the Nintendo. It was like the TI-88, not some Texas Instruments. It was like Hangman. I forget the actual platform,
like
but like
one of the calculators, or like some other.
It was like a keyboard console.
Okay.
Like you plugged in an actual cartridge. I'd have to pull it up. But yeah, it's like I was the weird nerd that played video games all throughout high school, or all throughout like when I was a kid, and didn't talk about it because it wasn't cool.
Yeah. We didn't go to convention. I was telling my nephew, I was like, because he was wearing like a Batman shirt, and I'm like, we didn't go to conventions when we were your age. We just got stuffed in trash cans. Like, that
was pushing the bushes. Yeah, that's how it goes. Like, you kids these days are doing dabs on Fortnite, and meanwhile we got our asses kicked growing up for playing video games.
Yeah, for having gone and seen the Batman movie.
Right.
And now you're the weirdo if you haven't seen every Marvel Cinematic Universe movie.
Hashtag not bitter.
Yeah, it's fine.
So you kind of touched this. You already kind of touched on this already, but beyond the things that are not currently in your collection, which were some of the hardest pieces to acquire in terms of like getting a lead, and then also like trying to track it down and actually get to it? Or is it go back to the expensive answer, I guess.
No, so anything from Japan is staggeringly difficult. I have found one human source. All of my Japanese art came from one human source, and it was just a staff member who had happened to relocate to the Seattle area and bring some stuff with them. And it was this person was responsible for returning art to artists, but that wasn't always, especially in the 90s, like that wasn't always super straightforward and easy. Like literally some of these artists would just disappear, right? Because it was with the especially with the Japanese artists, they used pseudonyms a lot, right? And so that's honestly what makes it so challenging just to find a lot of these artists, is any of them who used fake names, no one knows who they are. And now you add a layer of 30 years of memory fog onto that, and like no, and I've even just like showing pictures to like other artists, be like, hey, is this person? They're like, I don't know, man. I don't also at a certain extent, some of these artists really care, and they really care about their legacy, and they really care about their art, but a vast majority of them were just contract artists, commercial artists just trying to put food on their table, and they didn't care about the art. And that's why oftentimes, and you'll probably notice already me talking about these artists, that I don't very often mention them by name. And that's not me not paying reverence to them. That's not any of that. It's that these artists for these last 30 years have been nameless, and no one has bothered them, right? And now because these artists are all retirement age now, and so generally they don't particularly want to be bothered by us, right? And aren't sometimes particularly crazy about the fact that I found them. So I always kind of say, hey, would you like me to name you by name? And if I do, this is kind of what you can expect, because a lot of people are interested and they want to hear stories and they want to interface with these people and that kind of thing, right? And
right.
The vast majority of them are not particularly interested in doing that. So, and I respect that. So yeah, any of the Japanese artists are very difficult. You have obviously the geographic location, the now, because a lot of the Japanese artists specifically were already seasoned manga artists at the time, and so a lot of them were in their 40s 30 years ago, or 50s 30 years ago. Some of them have already passed. A number of artists have already passed, so that makes it difficult. Yeah, so the other thing that makes the Japanese stuff kind of difficult is that there seems to be, for Japanese artists, at least of a particular age, an onus of like, this is Japanese art, it's for the Japanese, we're keeping it in Japan. And so I have found a number of pieces that I know where they are, but the likelihood of me ever being able to get them out of Japan is very slim. So we'll see. But yeah. But aside from that, a lot of it's just time, right? It's not necessarily difficulty. It's more just an incredible time sink. And that's not just like, finding these people, but then also like once I find them, some of them aren't ready yet to give up their art, or because so sometimes it's me just sort of planting a seed and then walking away, and then a year later they'll be like, okay, I'm ready. Or sometimes it's going back to that box in the garage analogy, it's, oh yeah, I have something somewhere. Again, these people are not prioritizing this stuff, right? So like, oh yeah, I think I might have some stuff somewhere in a box somewhere. If I ever find it, I'll let you know, but until then, leave me alone. And a couple times it's actually paid off, where like I will get things in the mail randomly, after folks had said, if I ever find it, I'll let you know, and then they do. So yeah, it's when everything is one of a kind, nothing is technically more difficult to find than anything else, because it's all one of a kind. But there's definitely been like pieces that have certainly taken me longer, and that's generally why I don't go into it saying like, oh, I'm going to find this piece, right? I cast a very wide net. That's the only way that I find anything. I cast a very wide net and then be pleasantly surprised when I pull something up from the depths, right? That it actually happened. I learned my lesson. I have the Aladdin cover for Nintendo Power, and that particular piece, I worked for Disney Interactive for a long time. I love Aladdin, that game for the SNES, talking about going back to formative games. That's definitely on that list, right? And there she is, and I really wanted this piece, and I was like, I'm going to go hunt this piece. I feel like I worked for Disney for 9 years. I should be able to find this. I know the Disney artists. Spoiler alert: this is not done by a Disney artist. And so I spent like 6 months hunting this piece down, talking to everyone who worked for the studio at the time, like really, really trying to find this piece. And after that 6 months, I was like, okay, you know what? I'm done. Like, I'm wasting my time. I could be finding other things when I'm super hyper focused on this piece. If I ever find it, fine, great, whatever. 2 weeks after that, after that conscious decision that I'm going to stop looking for this piece, I run into an artist that had done several other covers, right? And so I asked him about one cover in particular, and he's like, yeah, I have that. And he shows it to me, and he's like, oh, but by the way, I also have these things. And in there was this piece. So yeah, 2 weeks after I decided I was giving up and never going to find this piece, I found it on accident, which I think, is I don't know. There's a moral in there somewhere.
That's awesome. I guess the real question is, what is the superior version of Aladdin? Is it the Sega Genesis version or is it the Nintendo version? And I will judge you.
Okay. All right. So I think I was a little bit on the younger side when I played this. And so by virtue of the Super Nintendo version being a little bit easier, I think I'm more fond of the Super Nintendo game. I think the Genesis game, from like a technical level, is probably the better game, and certainly like that's the one that had like Disney artists actually drawing animation frames for it. So I respect the Genesis version, but if you put them both on a table and asked me to play one, I'd pick the Super Nintendo one every time.
Yeah, I'm in the same camp. Growing up, I thought I was getting the wimpy version because the Nintendo version didn't have swords, which I was always jealous of. I was like, Sega Genesis has swords and we have apples in this game. The hell? This is horseshit. Yeah. But then after playing the Sega Genesis version, I'm like, because you can speed run the Nintendo Aladdin. Like, it's so much fun to speed run.
Yeah,
and so
the traversal in that game is incredible, especially for the time. Like, there's Aladdin there was like parkour elements in that game that you wouldn't see in another title. Yeah, that you wouldn't see in a game again for a long time. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, we already kind of cracked into it, so let's just get into it. The thing that the people are here for, which is the art of Nintendo Power. So. Woo! I have some screens which were graciously provided by you. So I want to talk about, we're going to get into the interiors first. So can you explain, I guess, where some of the stuff came from?
Sure. So these are actually funny. This one and the next one. Nintendo Power artists were notorious, and most of it was for like, hey, we have crazy deadlines, or it's going to take us too long to like go to Mirage and have them send us something that's print ready, right? So they would trace. So both of these are from Mirage, the Mirage Ninja Turtles. That one in particular is from the novelization or graphic novelization of the first film. This is like at the very end when they all high five after they kill Shredder. Spoiler alert.
I think it's been long enough.
Yeah. But yeah, so these both these pieces were redraws, and when I say redraw, I mean just traces of Mirage Ninja Turtles.
That's awesome. They got some Clay Fighter stuff here.
Yeah, so this is interesting. Most of the time, you wouldn't see this because again, it takes time to get art from the publisher, but this is art from the publisher. So the Clay Fighter stuff, this is from the manual for the Super Nintendo game. And then they actually took the art from the manual and also put it in the magazine, which again you would very seldom see because it was just faster for them to just redraw, because they very seldom then they work with publishers back then. Like, it wasn't like you would think of now where it's like people had like rights of refusal, or like, got to give notes. Like Nintendo Power just did what, it was just sort of like this handshake deal of like, like you guys are, it's a net benefit for you, right? If we feature your game, at least for the first, I don't know, 60, 70 issues, there were never any ads in the magazine at all. And there was no paid opportunity. So like all of the games for the covers, for instance, like today you would think like, oh yeah, the game publisher is probably paying the magazine, or someone's paying someone to get put on that cover.
Right.
That was not the case for Nintendo Power. It was just, they just decided internally. It was basically whatever game was doing the best in that month would get the cover. And so generally you wouldn't see this where they actually took art from the manual and put it in the magazine. But those two, going back real quick, those are actually cells as well. So the color there that's why you see that big piece of tape across the top. So there's a piece of celluloid in the front, and that's all the black line is on the cell, and then the color is painted on the board in the back.
I see. That's rad. Got some Roger Rabbit sketches.
Yeah, so these are cells, again, painted cells. Obviously in this case, the as you can see with Roger and the taxi there,
Benny.
Yeah, Benny. The line work here is printed on acetate, but then on the paint is on the back of the cell in this case. But this art was by Hideki Itoy. So this is some of the Japanese art that I have, and it's funny because you wouldn't really associate Roger Rabbit, that brand, with Japanese artists, but yeah, Hideki Itoy also painted a lot of or not a lot, but some of the original work for Zelda, the first Zelda game.
Oh wow!
Yeah, he was a really prolific. He also worked on Macross and all the Harmony Gold stuff. So he was a very prolific. Again, especially starting out, Nintendo of Japan really leveraged their relationships with Japanese magazines to source artists, and so a lot of these, especially in the early days, a lot of the Japanese artists that worked on the magazines were really prolific Japanese manga and anime artists.
That's rad. I think this is another one of my favorite pieces that you have.
Yeah,
I absolutely love this game growing up.
Yeah, I love everything about this. I love the game. I love that it is wide format, because this was the bonus issue and for the year, and so it folded out. And I don't know if I can show you. I have the piece. Let's see if I can. Boop, 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 boop. So it's over there on my wall.
Oh.
I know it's hard to see there, but because my monitor's in the way. Awesome. But the thing that I love about that piece is that it's painted in almost 1-to-1. So a lot of times when you would see covers, they would be painted much larger than the published cover, because it's easier to hide mistakes. It's easier to paint detail. There's like all sorts of reasons why it behooves you to paint very large and then photograph it down. Whereas in this case, this is a piece by Dan McGowan, who is no longer with us. And he painted this 1-to-1. So seeing a piece of art that is virtually identical in size to the published work really shows a high level of skill and a high level of confidence. Because if you effed up drawing on that scale, it would be much harder to mask your mistakes.
Yeah,
and that's all airbrush, by the way.
This is.
Yep. Yep.
Wow.
A vast majority of the covers were actually airbrushed. So yeah, this is him making a stencil. Basically, it would start with a piece of like onion paper as a sketch, and then he would adhere pieces of tape called frisket to that to make a stencil. And so you paint a piece and then pull away a piece of tape, and then paint and then pull away and then paint and pull away until all the tape was gone and you had the finished piece. So yeah, that's all airbrushed.
Wow. And some character pieces here of Pete as well.
Yep, those are all interiors, different artist. That's what's one of the charming things about the magazine at large is that almost every page, or at least every game section, was done by a different artist, and that's one of the things that I always felt was charming. Like the lack of cohesive art direction was one of my favorite things about the magazine, because it really made it feel like it was something that me and my friends could make. Like, I don't know if you ever made like any comic books or magazines when you were a kid, but it was like a hot mess of like, clashing art. And I always felt like the magazine really did feel like it was made like for kids by kids.
Yeah, I agree entirely. Some more interiors.
That's the back cover of the strategy guide. And that's those are airbrushed as well. So yeah, they're just like holding those screenshots over there. It's minor in the fact that they're just these little back cover illustrations, but any first party art is devastatingly difficult. And because most of the time, like that's kind of one of the neat things about collecting for the magazine is like sometimes, as far as like original art for any particular game being out there, it's really just the cover for the actual game, which either is not available or incredibly expensive, like sometimes six figures, right, for game covers. So there's that art, and then there's the art that they did for this magazine, and so being able to say I have I have another piece for Mario 3 as well. One of the Waterland Frog King. I have a cell of him as well, but anything from Mario is obviously really difficult to source.
Yeah, I'd have to imagine so.
Yeah. Adventure Island 2. Yeah, this was when I talk about that first artist that I found. These are some of his pieces.
That's rad.
These are done on computer paper. Which I was always, wow. Yeah. So I mentioned it. I don't remember if we're recording when I mentioned it or not, but like generally the medium for the art was left up to the artist in a lot of cases. And so you just have like, sometimes it'll just be Copic markers on computer paper, and in this case that's exactly what this is. It's markers on the cheapest possible paper you could possibly find.
And then
this is some art that Blizzard's not crazy about me having.
Oh, well, we'll go to the next one then.
No, it's fine. It's nothing disparaging against Blizzard, but to their credit, they are a company. Say what you will about current situations, they are a company that cares very much about their history. Yeah. And so they do have a very robust art archive of their own art. So generally, anytime that someone has Blizzard art that they don't own, they get a little prickly about it. But yeah, this is for Rock and Roll Racing.
One of their early titles.
Yeah.
Zombies Ate My Neighbors.
Very, very few Lucas pieces from the magazine, especially properties like Star Wars, Indiana Jones, that kind of stuff. Because generally, those big blockbuster movies, generally the magazine would use stills, right? So 9 times out of 10, if you have a Star Wars game in Nintendo Power, it's just going to have stills from the movies. So usually the Lucas stuff that you find is like kind of weird and ancillary. Like I have some Indiana Jones stuff, but it's just like the headpiece for the Staff of Ra, and like the Coronado's cross, and just all these like little kind of set piece doodles that were just kind of littered around the page. Those are the kinds of things that you generally find for that kind of stuff.
And then I think this is some of my favorite stuff because this is a deep cut for anybody that remembers the magazines, which is this is some envelope art.
Yeah, so I guess I lied when I said that everything is equally difficult to find. By far, the most difficult class, if you were to separate all the art into different classes like covers and posters and etc. Envelope art by far is the most difficult to find because they didn't send it back to kids. So someone had to specifically decide to keep this art in order for it to, and then having it leave the building for it to survive, because it just wasn't practical and it wasn't safe. And I have reached out to a number of these kids just to sort of like make sure, be like, hey, did they ever send you your art back? And I've never had any one person say that they ever sent their art back. So this set in particular is near and dear to my heart because not only is it amazing artwork from children, but it's the entire set for that magazine. So that's every envelope in the Player's Pulse section for that issue.
Yeah, I was gonna say it seems like you have it arranged one for one, which is super awesome to see that.
Yeah, I have 3 or 4 issues. These are very expensive to frame, as you might imagine, because of the number of
Right.
of holes that they have to make. And that frame is also very, very large. Because I frame everything with, I'm sure your listeners slash watchers have probably noticed already, but I frame everything with the published piece. So it's never just like me framing a cover. It's me framing the art and the actual cover. And in this case, it's me, I had to make room for the extra pages. On that zombies piece, there was like 9 pieces of art and then like 6 different pages, right? You see in the top there. So like the majority of that frame is actually taken up by the published pieces. But it makes it, because I exhibit the art, it makes it essential for people like understanding in an instant what's happening, like what they're looking at. Because again, like I said, I could not wrap my head around the fact that this stuff still exists, and that holds true to just about anyone who looks at it. They all think that it's prints, or that I somehow like digitally edit, copy off of covers and make posters and that kind of thing. Like they all think that it's something that I fabricated in Photoshop. So framing things with the finished page, like in an instant, someone can look at it and kind of better understand what it is they're looking at.
For sure.
This is one of my favorite pieces in the entire collection. And because it's a little bit deceptive, or like it's not immediately apparent what this is. But so when they made maps, and it's not just this Dragon Warrior map, but like any of like the level maps you saw for in the magazine, etc. Screenshots were not a thing in the early magazines. And so when they took screenshots, they were literally photographing monitors, going in a little dark booth and taking photographs of televisions. And that is the case here. So this is the world map for Dragon Warrior. It was also packed into the game, but featured as a poster in Nintendo Power magazine. And you're looking at about 500 Polaroid photos that have been cut up and pasted together by hand. And you can see, especially like the variance in the water, you can actually see like how this thing's been cut up. Also, you'll notice that the main character, it's kind of fuzzy in this presentation here, but you see him littered all around the map, right? That little blue guy is like everywhere you look, every few inches, there's like a little blue guy. There he is. There's like 3 or 4 of them on this screen right now. And that's because they couldn't get him off the screen to take the picture. So, and that holds true too if you look at like the Mega Man maps or stuff like something like that. Like in the magazine, every few inches you'll see Mega Man hanging out somewhere, because they were just taking photographs of the screen. And this is one of those pieces of production that no one thought to keep. Right, like no one was keeping this kind of stuff. So this is the only example of traditional map making that I have come across, and I'm super fortunate to have it.
Yeah, it's super rad. And then you have some strategy guides as well. Yeah.
this is, going back to, first party work being difficult to source. The Metroid series is a nightmare to find anything for. And so to have this this cover is just an incredible find. This was actually the piece that I talked about. This is the same the artist for the Aladdin cover. It's the same artist, and this was that conversation where like I had found this piece, and he's like, "Yeah, I still have it," and then he had a bunch of other stuff too. But it's really funny because people get mad because they're like, "Oh man, they covered up Samus." But for anybody who doesn't have a copy of this, if you open the front cover, the entirety of the art is on the inside front cover, so you do still see her. She's just not. She's got covered up by the player's guide banner. Same artist, as you can probably tell, very similar composition. I do think it's funny that he intended on like the banner being painted in, and then they went ahead and just slapped the other one on top of it instead anyway.
Mm-hmm. And then you have some inserts here as well of just...
Yeah, these are posters.
Yeah.
This is what I think is incredible about this artist is his ability to this is Lee McLeod. His ability to mimic is incredible. If you look at the box for the Super Nintendo game for Demon's Crest, it's almost indistinguishable, the model on that box versus the gargoyle here. He really went out of his way to replicate Firebrand. That's his name. To replicate Firebrand from the cover. And I also love this piece, how it's framed, because it looks like the mountains just continue from one piece to the other. Just kind of, I didn't even do that intentionally. It just worked out that way. Same artist. Also Lee McLeod. This going back to how good Lee is at mimicking. For the longest time, and when I say we, like the collective art community, thought that this piece was also the piece for the cover, and that they just like cut them out and placed them in a different orientation, because this is incredibly close to the box art for the Super Nintendo game. It's just they're just reoriented. This is a great piece. Also another Blizzard piece.
Yeah, I was gonna say another piece you probably shouldn't have, but you do anyway.
Yep. YOLO. Couple fun facts about this one. This is a paint over photograph. So those two gentlemen got dressed up in those get-ups, and Lee took a picture of them and then painted directly over that photo. So somewhere under that paint is a photo of those two guys. And then he added the helicopter in the background, obviously, too. But and then this is actually this is the other side of the Dragon Warrior map. So if you flipped over that the piece on the left, which is the published piece, because you can see the seams there, that they would have the Dragon Warrior map printed on the back. So that's actually I think that's the only instance where I own both sides of a poster.
That's awesome. And now I want to get into like the stars of the show, which is the covers. And some of these pieces like absolutely knocked me out. Like I can't believe that you actually got your hands on some of this stuff, because it's so iconic that when you see it, it's like seeing a long lost friend for the very first time again, like after so long. So here's you reading Castlevania.
Yeah, this is one of my early promo shots.
Nice.
But this is obviously this is the cover for Super Castlevania 4, or for the issue for Super Castlevania 4. This is the only oil painting ever painted for the magazine. It's gigantic. So to my knowledge, it is also the physically largest piece. And the other kind of fun fact about this is that the artist hates it. I did a YouTube video of this, so you can like go to my Art of Nintendo Power. You can watch my video on this.
I'll link all that stuff in the description.
So Simon here was originally in a completely different pose. So if you look at the piece here, you see that big empty space in the lower left, and then looking at the magazine cover in my hand there, you can see that that's clearly where the title for the game went. And so when he originally painted this piece, his legs crept into that space. And so when the artist submitted that to the magazine, they asked him to repaint the legs. And so that's why if you look at that left foot, it's kind of like weirdly clubbed. Like that's just kind of an odd, right? Like it's just like an odd. You don't think about it until like I talk to you, until I actually call it out. But like the foot's in a really awkward position. The lighting, like where he's lit, is very inconsistent.
Yep.
Like if you look at his left hand versus his right hand, and then like the actual like light source, and then versus like the shadow on his legs, like it's no one could be lit that way physically.
The highlights being here and here, it looks like the light source is coming out of his crotch right now. So
right, yeah. And so the artist despised this piece. He was under the impression that he no longer owned it. He thought he had thrown it away. I asked him to just kind of do. He had been. This artist was also a cover artist for the like NES era. And so he had actually been sort of cleaned out by other collectors years before I had found him, but had this piece rolled up in the attic, and he brought it out, and I'm like, I paid, obviously I have the what, people ask what this costs, right? And it's like asking me what a car costs, right? Because it's like all, the range is incredible. This piece in particular, this is one of those like rare occasions where it probably should have been very expensive in a vacuum. I mean, it's a gorgeous oil painting. Should have been expensive, but because the artist hated it so much, he was basically just like, please just get this out of my house. And would not allow me to pay him very much. Like I didn't pay him nothing, but it was definitely cheap. And I don't get those stories very often. People think that I get a lot of like art donations and that, or like I'm an e-bigger, and that is literally the furthest from the truth. But this is one of the rare occasions where I got something that, in a vacuum probably should have been very expensive. That wasn't.
That's awesome.
Yeah, this is probably. I talk a lot about how people have nostalgia for the magazine that's completely separate from the games, right? Like, and so like I have a very visceral memory of me pulling this particular issue out of the mailbox when I was a kid. I have a lot of nostalgia to this issue. I have never played Darkwing Duck for the NES, right? So I have these huge nostalgic ties to the magazine, but not necessarily for the game. But this is one of the most, when people see this in real life, they freak out. Like this is one of the covers that people like genuinely freak out about. Probably ties to Disney Afternoon and that sort of that nostalgic place for people. He is a cell. The black line there is painted on acetate, and then all of the color is on the back. This is so I have a composite for this, like a rough that's done in colored pencil that is almost identical to this thing, only smaller. And it just, again, going back to like the technical expertise of the artist. And this is all, again, 100% airbrushed. So like all of that brickwork is airbrush.
That's so rad.
It's technically this is probably one of the most impressive pieces in the collection. I cried when I found this piece. So this
it's gorgeous. Yeah.
And this is Dan McGowan again, who's no longer with us. He was a contract artist for, I don't know, 40 years. So like at the same time that he was painting Nintendo Power covers, he was also, painting tea boxes for herbal essences, like, but yeah, this is so I tell people how little little artists had to go off of sometimes for these especially these covers, where it was like really tight deadlines, and they certainly didn't have time to play these games, and sometimes they would like send them, you know, screenshots from the manual or something like that and be like, good luck. Like in this case, this is supposed to be Flammy from Secret of Mana, and if anyone who has played the game knows that this looks absolutely nothing like her. So but you know, in a vacuum, a absolutely stunning piece. But again, this is all airbrushed except for the plants in the background. That's all done by hand. But yeah, it's a beautiful piece by Dan McGowan.
Talked about Aladdin earlier.
Talked about Aladdin. So I talked a little bit about process right earlier, and so this is an example of tissue paper line work. So like normally someone would say this is like a rough, but it's difficult to term it that way because it was really a stencil. So like the lines on this, like when you talk about like a comp or a rough, generally like it's a little bit different than the published piece, right? Like it was just like a first attempt, right, of like trying to like get their positioning correct or their colors correct, or you know, just kind of a first draft. But with airbrushing and with stencil tissues like this, line for line, it's identical to the published piece because it was used as a stencil. So it's like this weird middle ground of being a rough but not, because it's also line for line identical to the published piece.
This one.
Yeah. You know, I have there aren't you get desensitized to anybody, like anybody who has a large collection of anything. Like a new person walks into your house and they're like, holy fuck, but like it's in your house every day, like, and you get desensitized to it. I never stopped smiling at this piece. This again, going back to like 1-for-1 painting and the expertise of doing that. I mean, this piece is technically very, very, very clean. But yeah, it's just I mean, it's Final Fantasy 2. Like, what do you? So this is also one of the very rare instances of an American artist painting Final Fantasy art. 9 times out of 10, when they did art for Final Fantasy, it was done by a Japanese artist. More than 9 times out of 10, honestly. And so to find an American artist painting official Final Fantasy art, it's incredibly rare. Yankee King for the Game Boy. And just for the curious as to why I've framed a couple of these pencils. Usually it's if I don't own the final painting, then and I do own the rough, then or do own the stencil, then I'll frame the stencil. But yeah, this is one of the cases where this and the Guile piece, the artist has no idea what happened to the final, but he happened to keep. I was just fortunate that he happened to keep a drawer full of his roughs, and that I was able to find this. And like I said, I love part of this is showing process. Like I do, like yes, it's like it's fun to make people go ooh and ah at the final paintings, but like also being able to be like, hey, this is how magazines were made in the 90s. This is not, you know, it's like nobody does magazines anymore, but the few that do definitely don't do them like this. So
Right.
like being able to also expose people to process is very important to me. I love how much crotch is in the actual painting. This cracks me up, like how focused, like your eye just goes straight to the crotch. But
which explains why it's cropped a little bit, probably.
yeah, I'm sure it is. This was actually my first cover. I definitely overpaid for it because I was excited to have a cover. But and now looking back, it seems silly because I have like 30 covers, and which is a significant majority of the painted covers that were painted. But yeah, it just cracks me up. The focal point on this painting is the crotch, like randomly.
Got to draw a lot of attention to the buckle.
That's right. Battletoads versus Battletoads and Double Dragon. Really, really bad game, but a very cool cover. Yeah, this is the same artist as the Aladdin cover, actually, and that Final Fantasy 2 cover. Now I'm thinking about it, but I love Battletoads, but and again, this is an instance where like I'm much more fond of the art and the magazine for this game than I am of the game. So it's kind of fun that like the magazine can sort of salvage a bad game in the hearts and minds of us. Like Pugsley's Scavenger Hunt got a cover.
Oh,
I don't know if you saw that.
Yeah.
But I don't know if it's in here or not. But like
It's
that
not.
was like for that game to have gotten the cover is bananas. Like that was just not because I was talking to Gail Tilden, who's she was the editor in chief at the founding editor in chief for the magazine, and I'm like, how did this game get the cover? And she just goes, yeah, that's when I found out like, oh, there was no paid opportunities, because that's sort of what I assumed, that somebody paid them to put that horrible game on the cover. And it was just like things that were technically rated the highest. So it was just this happenstance of like, in that month, nothing great came out. So Pugsley's Scavenger Hunt got the cover.
It's somewhat branded IP, so might as well throw it that way. I mean,
Right.
I love Fester's Quest, but yeah, that game sucked real bad. Fester's Quest is super hard, but I actually really love that game.
Yeah. This is Dan McGowan's piece. This was it blows me away when I find, because like having a background at Disney and stuff, and like understanding how like hard they train those like Disney artists to like be on brand, to see commercial artists who are not trained by the first party studio to paint these, it's like, this is incredible work. I mean, this is just absolutely beautiful, and the compositions of the clouds here blows me away. And just like the use of negative space here, like this is basically a big painting of nothing, but it's just incredibly well done and compelling. Yeah, Dan was an incredible talent. Actually, if you anyone who is in the Seattle area,
Like me.
if you go to Whole Foods in Seattle, in the back of the store, there's a big
which Whole Foods?
I don't remember which one, but there's a Whole Foods in Seattle in which there's a big painted mural in the back. It's like a Thanksgiving mural. And Dan actually painted that mural by hand.
That's rad.
So you can go into Whole Foods and see Dan's work.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm near the Westlake one, but I'll have to look that up.
Yeah. I love this piece. So this is so like typically you would see this where on the finished piece here, they would have printed all of these characters on a piece of acetate and then done the color in the background. But in this case, this is the original line work. So so prior to being painted on the acetate, we haven't been able to find the finished cover, but yeah, this is the original line work for the characters. And you just don't see, again, Mario Kart a lot, to see first party art that isn't just like stolen from the manual is pretty rare.
Yeah, it's even the line work alone is just so awesome.
Yeah. This is more Lee McLeod. You can see a signature there in the lower right hand corner. So this is the same artist that did the Demon's Crest poster and the Lost Vikings poster. It's crazy because like you and I was talking to you about this before the recording. Medium was all left up to the artist, and so like sometimes you would literally get things drawn in crayon, and then conversely you would have these like fine artists who like are just incredible painters, and just like knock out these like little one-off pieces. And like this is just like an interior insert shot. Like if you look at the page, I think the page is on this. Sorry, zoom out. It's just like this like throwaway insert shot for the game, and yet it's just gorgeous painting.
Yeah, it's so awesome. And you're mentioning having weird like IP stuff and only really having
and like weird, but like the collection isn't necessarily all art. Sometimes it's production materials, and this is an example of that. So this is the photograph or the photo positive that Warner Brothers sent to Nintendo Power to then to make this cover. So they just essentially blew up the photo positive here and then painted the background. So the background, which we can't find, is airbrushed, but then this is just literally a promo photo of Michael Keaton.
And now to the crown jewels. This is the stuff that when I first saw it just absolutely knocked me out. Like I think it's really this one here in particular. The Mega Man 2 that I'm just like, oh my God.
Yeah, this is the stuff where, I talk about, first of all, things that like I never stop smiling at, obviously this cabinet, but also just like there's like varying levels of emotions when I look at something and say like, oh, like this, it doesn't make sense that this still exists, right? I look at these and go, there's literally no reason why any of this should exist. Because again, contract artists, right? And in this case, you have like physical models taking up physical space in an artist's in a contract artist's workshop, right? So like especially that WILY model, because it's so large, like I still don't understand why they kept that like at a functional level, because when that was made, Nintendo wasn't Nintendo, right? Like no one was like shaking their crystal balls and like seeing like, oh, I should definitely keep this because it's going to be worth something someday, or some kid's going to want to make a museum. No one was thinking about that. So like, and some of the things were thrown away. Like I have principal photography for the Maniac Mansion that was like something like 200 pounds of polymer clay. It was a very, very large model, and they took some photos of it and then threw it in the trash. So I was very, very fortunate that I was able to find these. Those shoes, for instance, walked up to me at a convention, no pun intended. That was a vendor that was just like, hey, it was when I was doing at Portland, when I was doing the gameplay counselor exhibit. And he came up to me. He's like, hey, I have these. And I'm like, I don't understand how, but great. And he's like, are you interested? I'm like, yeah, I'm interested. So yeah. And just, so these are the shoes for the Track and Field 2 cover, which is issue 3, for Nintendo Power. And they're Converse with shit glued on them. Like talking about low budget. I don't know if you have a picture of it in here, but I also have the one of the Dracula masks that they used for the head of Dracula for issue 2.
I do.
And that was just like a Halloween store mask. Yeah, there you go. So that's not the Dracula head, but it's the same mask that they used for the Dracula head. And yeah, figuring out that was just a Halloween store mask. Like in retrospect, it's like, of course it was, but like, I don't know why I ever thought that they would actually make that. Especially then, because again, these budgets were shoestring budgets.
And this was the controversial cover that like a lot of parents complain that like there's a decapitated Dracula on the cover.
Yeah, and then it makes it all the funnier that it was just a mask. Like, yeah, for sure. Sorry, you can go back to this stuff. I just was on a tangent.
No, it's good. I mean, I just wanted to bring it up while you were talking about it because I mean this is one of the most iconic ones because I remember seeing it, but I never actually owned it because I don't know if my mom kept it from me or not. She's probably like, oh, it's demonic. No, thank you.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love that they added fangs to it. Yeah, but this to me, like this is the most iconic one because I think this is actually my very first issue of Nintendo Power. So like seeing this as a physical piece, like that WILY, and it absolutely blows me away that this still exists. So that's why I'm thankful that you have this collection.
And I love it too because it's all found part in the kit bash. Like, so obviously, like the actually hull of the piece is like sculpted polystyrene, but like so much of this is just found object stuff. Like the jet on the back there, you can see is like half of the like plunger that goes in the tank of your toilet. Um, and like it's all like Gundam pieces and stuff, like and like plumbing pieces and like gaskets and stuff on the top there. And then he's just velcroed in there, so you can actually move him. But yeah, it's I love that it's just sort of this big like Gundam kit bash. Yeah, it's great. It's just a beautiful piece.
It's awesome.
That one too. That's a lot of Gundam pieces too, and the like the little like there's little guns that are like the stabilizers on the legs are like little Gundam rifles, and that head is a Gundam head, and yeah, it's so that's the crab walker from Super Contra that you can barely see on the cover.
That's so rad. So much nostalgia, so much awesome stuff. I love it. Yeah. So before we leave, is there anything that you'd like to plug? Social media sites, cool things happen in your life next time people get to see this?
Yeah, so I'm at the SoCal Retro Gaming Expo in February, so check that out. This has been
of 2022.
Yeah, 2022. Yes, February of 22. This has been, getting out there has been sort of slow going, obviously, because we're still sort of crawling out of the hole of that is the pandemic. It was really frustrating for me, honestly, because I had built all this before, like a lot of this collection, and like, I spent $30,000 on framing and all this stuff, right, to get it show ready. And this was right before the pandemic. I was like, I booked E3 and I booked PAX West and I booked like all these like big shows, and I was really excited, and then everything got canceled. But yeah, so the next show that you can see us physically at is the SoCal Retro Gaming Expo. And honestly, like, if you have a convention or just love a convention and you'd love us to be there, just put them in contact with us. An easy way to get to me is via Twitter. There, it's on screen now. The Art of NP. But honestly, if you just Google Art of Nintendo Power, having Nintendo Power in your name is very good SEO. So it's I will be the first thing that you find if you Google Art of Nintendo Power. Yeah, just get them in contact with me. And again, we're a nonprofit, so we don't charge for anything. It's just the only thing that I ask is that the show kind of pays our way to get there, right? But the actual exhibit is free, and we don't charge anything aside from whatever the show charges for the door price. So yeah, if you have a show or attend a show that you love and you'd like to see us there, we would like to be there. So let them know we exist and point them my way, and we can get something on the calendar. That's actually one of the reasons why I started the actual nonprofit, to sort of help shows that can't pay us to get there, to help subsidize that. All of the art that's in the collection is self-funded. Like, none of your donations would ever go to buying art, because that just feels weird to me. But it goes to things like truck rentals and gas money and framing. Like I said, in 2020 I spent $30,000 on framing. Framing's very expensive. So yeah, I use all of the proceeds we get to help facilitate the show, not through buying art, because like I said, that just feels weird to me. But I'm on most of the social things. Twitter is at Art of NP. If you actually want to talk to me, that's usually the best way to get me. I'm very active there, and my DMs are open. And then I'm also on Instagram, Art of Nintendo Power with underscores under it. And then I'm on YouTube as Art of Nintendo Power as well. But yeah, so our next show is in February, and other than that, like, I'm still, honestly, the actual designation of like the 501c3 designation is still new, and I also have very little time for anything. So so it's been slow going. But if you want to donate, just reach out and we can figure something out. And it is 100% tax deductible, so any donations I can like give you a receipt for, and it's all above board. If you're in the U.S. or Canada, we can get you a donation for, or a receipt for your taxes. So yeah, I think that's kind of all I'm doing. Oh, also I'm 1/3 of the Collector's Quest podcast. If you're into podcasts, where we talk a lot about sort of the nuts and bolts of collecting, and like, how to structure your lists, and like good data versus bad data, and like the actual sort of nitty gritty part of collecting. So if that's your thing, we're on all of the podcast things, and that's something I'm doing as well.
Cool. I'll make sure all that stuff is in the description of the video. So
Sure.
Thank you so much, Stephan.
Yeah, of course, man.
Thank you for your such rare and limited amount of time. I appreciate it immensely.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
yeah, anytime.
Everybody else, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.